I want to pick up from where we were talking with Stefan Bancel just a few moments ago, Bill. Where does growth come for your business in 2022?
Yeah, thanks very much, Guy and Alex, for having me on the show. We're really excited about 2022. Roche is the largest R&D investor in the world in life sciences, with over $13 billion annual investment in R&D. And we really see growth from a number of sources. We're continuing to fight the pandemic alongside our colleagues from across the industry. And we've delivered over 21 testing solutions from Roche Diagnostics. We've delivered 2 of the leading therapeutics for fighting COVID in hospitalized patients as well as outpatients. But when we look at growth in 2022, our big sources are going to be more from our ongoing pipeline of cancer medicines and medicines for other serious diseases.
So there's a lot to unpack there, Bill. It's Alex here in New York. Let's just start with COVID testing for a moment. That was all the rage for the last 3 weeks. Like, how do we get tests? How can we make them affordable? How do we get more tests into the hands of people here in the U.S.? Give us a sense as to how the COVID testing business is doing, and then how you think distribution and manufacturing is going to take place over this next year.
Well, certainly Omicron has presented an unprecedented challenge from a demand standpoint. But I think when you look at what the industry has done to ramp up the volumes, it's extraordinary. I mean, before the pandemic, there were some millions of these sorts of tests performed each year in the world, and now we're talking about billions. So the scale up has been tremendous, and I'm really proud of the heroes we have in manufacturing and engineering, in the medical side, who've been responsible for this. I think the peak with Omicron is probably happening in our midst, and I think that we should be in a better position. I think the world should be in a better position with tests as we move forward. But the volumes today are so extraordinary that I just don't think there's any scenario in which we could have produced enough.
Do you think we move away from PCRs to more lateral flows? This is obviously an engineering question as much as anything else. But given the volume that we're talking about here, given the need to have testing quickly and accurately so that we can deliver therapeutics early on and make sure that we treat people correctly, Bill, do you think we find ourselves in a situation where actually lateral flows become the go-to rather than relying on PCRs as the definitive?
Yeah, I think in terms of volumes, we could expect to see a lot more sort of rapid antigen tests. This is, available for people to do themselves instead of having to go in and see a doctor or go into a healthcare facility. So, I think that'll be the mainstay. The gold standard in terms of efficacy will remain PCR. But for example, our test that was just recently approved relative to PCR had 95% sensitivity, had 100% selectivity. Mm-hmm. So, we're talking pretty high standard for a self-test as well. And we're really pleased to be able to deliver tens of millions of these tests even in January in the U.S., having just been approved.
Bill, I just have one more question on the testing for me. There's been questions as if rapid tests for at home are sensitive enough to Omicron to catch it. And then Guy and I have continued to have this conversation on radio about how the UK does nasal and throat swabbing together. We only do nasal here in the US. And I wanted to get your perspective on that, if we just need different kinds of testing to encapsulate some of these variants.
Yeah, I think the data is still coming in on that. I think it would be very hard to make the call. Certainly, the more intrusive the test is, the harder it is to get people to comply and to do it. So, there's always a trade-off in terms of convenience and maybe catching 100% of cases. But I think that's something we'll just have to continue to navigate.
Let's turn back to what is happening in terms of other drugs and therapies that you produce. Bill, we are seeing the healthcare system once again not being overwhelmed, but being close to overwhelmed by what is happening with Omicron. There are tens of thousands of people on either side of the Atlantic currently. That's just the geographies we're focusing on in this conversation, but globally, the numbers are even bigger. Do you think we are in a situation where that is once again distracting the healthcare industry from dealing with other areas, oncology, all the other areas that so dominated prior to the pandemic, the healthcare setting? What are you seeing right now in terms of demand from hospitals for other drugs and therapies?
Yeah, Guy, I think you make a really important point, and we certainly saw this early in the pandemic. There was a tremendous disruption, even of cancer care. I think the situation's quite different today. I think we're seeing that the world is being affected certainly by Omicron, but there's still a lot going forward. It's not only care for COVID that's happening. And I also think it's important to note, the time factor, because in South Africa, from the time there was no Omicron to the peak was only a few weeks. And then within a couple more weeks, they'd come off the peak by, something 60 or 70% lower. So I think we could expect that what we're experiencing today won't be what we're experiencing even in 2 or 3 weeks. And so I think based on that, there should be a lower impact on other care areas.
Bill, let's get more specific too and talk about Roche's Alzheimer drug. Biogen's foray into this was very controversial, and now there are questions they pushed it too far too fast, and now maybe they won't get the take up that they were expecting, and insurers won't kind of touch it with a 10-foot pole. For your Alzheimer drug development, how are you going to do things a bit differently to avoid what happened to Biogen?
Yeah, I think it's really important that the Alzheimer's community has very clear answers on efficacy and safety. We have the largest phase 3 development program in the world on gantenerumab. It's 2 large phase 3 studies. They're 27 months in duration, so they're also the longest. We should have really some definitive answers for physicians, for people with Alzheimer's and their loved ones. We'll have that data towards the end of this year, and we're really looking forward to bringing that to patients.
Bill, what lessons have we learned? What are the silver linings that have come out of the pandemic? One of the things that I've certainly been aware of, certainly the conversations that I've had with people in the industry, is there's a new appreciation for partnerships. There's a new appreciation for trying to harness the entire ecosystem in the efforts we make to try and treat all kinds of different things. How do you think the industry has changed, and what does it mean for what you do at Roche Pharma?
Well, I think we've learned a tremendous amount about how fast we can go with innovation. We've been very committed to delivering new medicines for cancer, for multiple sclerosis, hemophilia, many other serious diseases. But what we've learned during the pandemic is how we can use remote work, how we can use sort of virtual partnerships to greatly accelerate things. And the speed at which we stood up the studies for Actemra, for Ronapreve, to bring new COVID therapies to the market, we can use those for other therapies. We also learned that we can enroll patients from different backgrounds, from diverse backgrounds. We ran a study for Actemra in patients who were really underrepresented in traditional clinical studies, in African Americans, in Hispanics. We even enrolled sites in Africa in really short order and got a very strong result there. And I think we learned that you don't have to do something different. You have to be innovative, and you can actually accelerate development at the same time that you have more inclusive development.